I came across a piece on MSN News about the actor Daniel Dae Kim, who people may know as playing the character of Jin in Lost. I've just been through Lost, so I'm very familiar with his character. He was an important character in the show. He started off quite an unlikable character. Um, he was a man who didn't speak English, but he came across as kind of cold to the others, controlling of his wife. Not a very likable character. And there's one scene where he just randomly attacks one of the other characters, an African American guy played by Harold Perrineau. But anyway, as we see Lost develop, Jin turns out to be one of the most developed characters and an interesting character, and in the end, quite an empathetic character. He's actually a pretty rounded guy, and you see that was one of the clever things about Lost. You know, the characters are not black and white, so I think it was well written. But anyway, that's what he's known from. So he was doing an interview, and in the interview, I'm going to put a link. I had actually read this out before and I tried doing screen share, but then the video got cut off, so I'm not going to do that. I'll just put a link. But basically, what he has said is something interesting. He said that when it comes to casting, what's now happening in Hollywood and the entertainment industry is an overcorrection. This is how he put it, an overcorrection. So he said that he understood why, when it came to casting specificity, there would be, for example, Japanese Americans or Chinese Americans wouldn't be cast as a Korean American. And he acknowledged that the reason this has developed is because as time went on, casting directors wanted to get away from the idea all Asians are the same. So that was understandable. But he argues this has now went too far the other way, and it's actually creating opportunity barriers. So, and there's a lot more nuance in the interview. He talks about how, for instance, British actors like Benedict Cumberbatch and Henry Cavill and Andrew Garfield have played popular superheroes, American superheroes, and there's never any major controversy with that. Um, he also says that when it comes to African Americans, there isn't the same questions about country specific roles. For instance, asking people if their background, if their heritage is from the Ivory Coast or Botswana. And he's mentioned other things as well. I think he's onto something, and I kind of agree with some of the things he's saying. But I would point out a few observations that I've got about this, about the issue of casting, the issue of representation. In the past, there was a lack of sensitivity. You know, I'm talking about the 50s and the 60s. You would see, for instance, John Wayne play Genghis Khan. Okay, I think in the past the attitude really was an actor. Their job is to act someone else, so it doesn't matter if they're white. They can act a Chinese character, or in that case, a Mongolian warlord. Um, but you know that I think the idea was an actor acts. They play another role. So who cares about prosthetics or blackface or yellowface? Understandably, today that is controversial because it was seen as mocking, particularly at a time when so few minority actors had opportunities. So I do understand the controversy with that. But I do think it's now went to the other extreme almost, where there's a hypersensitivity around casting. And what I mean by that is you get lobby groups who seem to spend all their waking hours obsessed about issues of representation. Now, there is a basic truth that the job of an actor is to portray someone else. That is fundamentally their job. And I've always taken the view that so long as they can be convincing in the role, that's what should matter. So, for me, there's no problem with a Japanese actor playing a Korean, a Chinese actor playing Japanese, a British actor playing a German, a French actor playing a Belgian, etc., if it's broadly from the same geographical part of the world. But we've even had situations where non-British actors have played Bond. You know, George Lazenby is an Australian, played Bond. So I think that he's generally seen as the weakest Bond, but I digress. Um, what Daniel Dae Kim has pointed out is that sometimes, yes, there is a need for nationality specific casting. If, for instance, there's language nuances there where only someone from that part of the world would get that right. But sometimes he's argued that the characters should be better written. Well, again, I think this is something there has been a lot of development in. If you look at I actually think in some ways acting has improved over the decades. That's maybe a controversial thing to say, but if you look at acting in the 50s and the 60s, a lot of it was kind of stagey. I'm not saying bad, but there was a particular style to acting then. Today it's a bit. I dare say acting is maybe developed in a certain way, um, and I do wonder has it improved. I don't know. Maybe that's a controversial thing to say. Certainly, the style of acting has changed, because I think a lot of old actors came from a theatrical background. Today, that isn't often the case. But anyway, this issue of casting and representation, in a way, it can kind of like Daniel Dae Kim has spoken about how that it can actually close doors to actors. Um, I think it's true also in terms of creativity. I personally have a problem with this idea. Everyone should stick with their own. So this attitude that if someone isn't from a particular country or culture, then they can never write about it, they can never direct it. A story about that. And we see a lot of self flagellation going on. Danny Boyle, great director, he recently said he wouldn't do Slumdog Millionaire today, although he's proud of the project. He wouldn't do it today. He would give that project to a young Indian director. Um, but to my line of thinking, that was a successful movie. It was a really good movie. Um, and the characters were all Indian. It's not like, you were having white characters pretending to be Indians. And as a director, I'm sure he'd done his research at the time. Um, Eddie Redmayne has said that he wouldn't do The Danish Girl again, although he's proud of it. He regretted doing that. Well, why? Because he is a non-transgender person doing a transgender role. Michael Sheen recently said that non-Welsh actors shouldn't play Welsh roles. Well, to me that's ridiculous, because then Mr. Sheen would have to, practice what he preaches. He shouldn't take on any English roles, which is something he has done. He played Brian Clough, the Leeds United manager. He's played Tony Blair. Tony Blair was born in Edinburgh. So that's a bit hypocritical to say, oh no, I'm Welsh and only Welsh actors should play Welsh roles. But that's kind of silly, because Wales is a small country, so are you really going to limit roles that happen to be a Welsh character to only Welsh actors? Although I would point out Welsh actors are punched above the weight. It's a small country, but they've produced some great actors. Anthony Hopkins, Christian Bale, himself. So, I think that this obsession with representation, in a way, it's gone too far, and in a way, it contradicts itself. Let me give an example. If you have a role that lobby groups would consider to be stereotypical, let's say a Chinese factory worker, okay, my question would be, what if the storyline directly involves that? Let's say the story is about corporate corruption, and then it has to look at the chain of events, and it would look at something like that. Well, who else are you going to play a Chinese factory worker but a Chinese or Asian actor? I mean, that makes sense. And yet the lobby groups would say, oh, it's putting them in a stereotypical role. It's a harmful stereotype. But you can't have white actors doing it. So my question would be, what do you want in that situation? Do you want a better storyline? Well, maybe that is a good drama. I just think that what's being forgotten with this in the entertainment industry, this obsession and this hyperfixation on representation, is missing the fact that actors do fundamentally play someone other than themselves. Bradley Cooper got heat recently for taking on the role of Elmer Bernstein because there was some prosthetics to make him look like he had a large nose, which of course is a Jewish stereotype. The thing there though is Elmer Bernstein's own family were happy with the role Bradley Cooper portrayed. So if his own family is happy with it, shouldn't the critics just chill out a little bit and not read so much into it? I mean, that wasn't done in a way that was mocking Elmer Bernstein. It wasn't like, saying that this is a prominent, successful Jewish person. It wasn't a mocking sort of role. So I just think that there's too much hypersensitivity around this. I guess I would say in the case of East Asia, I do understand some of the historic sensitivities. For instance, Memoirs of a Geisha, which was written by Arthur Golden, a white American guy, and adapted to film. I know that when the Chinese actresses Zhang Ziyi and Gong Li were cast in that, there was controversies within China because of the perception that geishas are prostitutes. So I guess they sort of thought, why are these Chinese actresses playing Japanese prostitutes? But it's more nuanced than that, and the characters actually had a depth to them that anyone watching that film would see. I think it's a good movie. But again, the sensitivity there was because of the Pacific War, because of those wartime wounds that have not fully healed to this day. That's why it's more controversial, for example, than a British actor playing a German or a German playing a Briton. It doesn't carry the same level of controversy. In fact, British actors playing Germans was pretty common, really going way back. So, and there was never any major controversy with that. I just think that if you're watching a production and that production happens to be about your ethnic group, so long as it isn't overtly mocking, then really I don't think people should get so hung up on only this person can play this role. Sometimes it makes sense when it's glaringly obvious. I think it is ridiculous having black actors now playing white historic characters. Apparently, there's been a production about the Norman Conquest and they've had black knights on the battlefield at Hastings. No, that just isn't historical reality. So ironically, whilst in the past white actors were controversially doing yellowface and blackface, now you're having box ticking where you have black actors and Asian actors being put into historic dramas. Now, I see a hypocrisy from the lobby groups who are always talking about representation. They have no problem with that. Well, if you're all about authenticity, is it authentic to have, we're talking about 11th century England. The diversity would have been minimal. Not non-existent, but minimal compared to today. The chances of black soldiers at Hastings, unless there is some historic evidence to prove that was, it's just the chances of that are minuscule. It would have been more common in Roman Britain. Roman Britain was genuinely diverse, and historic evidence has testified to that. But not the 11th century. That's a different situation altogether. Or having a black Anne Boleyn. Again, to me, that was hyper woke lecturing. I'm going to cast this woman as Anne Boleyn. She's clearly a black actress, and if anyone complains, they're a racist. Now that's ridiculous, because everybody knows Anne Boleyn was white. It's just so there's situations like that where it's so obviously not accurate. I do have a problem with that. But when it comes to people who are, and this is what Daniel Dae Kim I think was touching on, and where I agree with him, it's silly to close the door to a Japanese American actor because he's not a South Korean, or a Chinese actor because he's not South Korean. If you have a role that is very, very specific, then surely what really matters is the best actor for that role, and if they can be respectful to the character that they're playing, or if it's a really obnoxious character, then portray that well. I just think that the entertainment industry in general has just got so hung up on this stuff. Actors have to remember they're fundamentally entertainers. It's not their job to constantly be crusaders for representation. I find it honestly a little bit tedious. As someone who loves film, my thinking is, wait a second, your job is to entertain me. Just, I understand that for young actors starting off, it is a difficult industry. A lot of actors do get disappointments, and it is difficult to be denied those opportunities. But I think that actors who have reached success, frankly, I have little sympathy with any sort of complaints that they come out with, because I'm thinking, unless you're complaining about the paparazzi, in which I sympathise with you, be grateful. You've got success, you've got fame, you've got fortune. Just, a lot of people don't get that. A lot of actors haven't reached that point. So I just think that within the entertainment industry, there's a real hanging up with this stuff, and it's tedious. So I just think actors, directors, everyone in the industry needs to get back to the entertainment value, or if it's a moving production, if it's a drama, there may be some educational value there. But I think audiences are just tired in general of being lectured, and in terms of casting, there has to be authenticity and respect there. I think any director Also, in terms of filmmaking, if you're making a production about another culture, yes, you should do your homework. But I do have a problem with this idea that everyone should stick with their own, because if you're going to argue that, then it kind of contradicts the whole point about representation and opportunities. If you're going to say, for instance, a white director or screenwriter can never write or talk about any other culture, then by extension you're saying, well, isn't it hypocritical to say we should have more minority figures in a white majority production? But then that wouldn't even happen today. If you had a white majority production, it would immediately be panned as racist. And yet you get things like Crazy Rich Asians, which is lauded for being the first all Asian production. Well, great, well done, but I don't want to hear arguments from any of the cast about condemning an all white production if they're then saying an all Asian production is progressive. You can't have it both ways. So I do see some inconsistency in these arguments. Anyway, I will wrap this up. I'll put a link to what he has said. I think he makes some good points. But it's ironic, that in the hypersensitivity to be so representative, there's actually overcorrection, as Daniel Dae Kim points out, which is putting up barriers. Realistically, you're not. I mean, it's the same with gay characters. What if gay actors just don't look like the person that may be portrayed? And again, this is something that all actors should bear in mind. Fundamentally, what is their job? Their job is to play someone else. When Daniel Dae Kim was playing Jin, he wasn't playing Daniel Dae Kim. He was playing Jin, who's a Korean man. So he can understand that, and he would have done his research on the character. But fundamentally, he is playing another person. I'm sure Daniel Dae Kim's own personality wouldn't have been like we saw Jin at the beginning of Lost, for instance. I just think, if I could summarize this, I think the industry has went from being too insensitive to being too sensitive. That's how I would summarize it.